car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis Wright and host David Lamb.
Hello and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday evening for the next half hour. We're going to talk about a topic of conversation that we think is relevant to you. But the best way for this to work is for you to join us in this conversation. There are ways you can call, text, email, that information displayed on the screen throughout the program. We'd love to hear from you as we talk about personal injuries and how they affect that area of law, specifically affects you in your lives. Josh Wright of the firm Hollis Wright here with us. Just the two of us, I think, is the song.
Just the two of us.
All right, it's just us. This is all we need.
We can do it if we try, right?
Yeah, we're going to give it a heck of a shot.
You know, this topic, accident injuries, really is within the sweet spot of what our law firm does on a daily basis. It's not to say that we don't do some other things too. But you know, a lot of times when we do this television show, we're dealing with topics and delving into topics that are not super relevant to what we do as a practice group, but are interesting and hopefully are helpful to the viewing audience. And so we can push the viewing audience that has, you know, those individuals that have questions and issues to the right lawyers that have that are experts in that area. Well, this is an area where we're experts in it, and we handle these things all the time. And you know, when you're dealing with accidents and injuries, they come in a lot of different colors and shapes and sizes, from industrial accidents to automobile accidents to trucking cases to product liability cases. So we're going to kind of talk about some of those topics today and just work our way through it. And I think you and I can do this show probably better than anybody else. I
think you can do this in your sleep. This is something you have a great deal of expertise and experience in. From a kind of a jumping off point, whenever you think of accidents and injuries, would automobile accidents be the most common cause or reason for folks to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's probably right now one of the more prevalent types of accident injury cases that are litigated. But it changes decade to decade. As I've practiced law longer and longer, I've realized that there are certain things that become more prominent in the legal world. There was a period where products liability-based lawsuits and workers' comp-based lawsuits were even more significant than automobile accidents. But with the onset of texting and telephones, the statistics are that there are going to be more car accidents in the next decade than there ever have been in history. And that's not because cars aren't getting safer, it's because drivers are getting more careless. And so I'd say yes, there are 11 to 12,000 new accidents a year in Alabama. It is the leading cause of death in teenagers and young males under the age of 30 years old. So it's a very prevalent issue that we see on a daily basis. But they don't all come in just as the same type car accident. A lot of times they will come in with different issues, whether it's distracted driving, whether it's a product liability-based lawsuit. I have a case right now that recently came in that has a dram shop or a liquor liability component where somebody was intoxicated that caused the accident and the ultimate injury, but there's also a product component to the lawsuit too. So sometimes these things just kind of morph into a suit coming from different areas of personal injury law.
You know, one of a fascinating business sector that is going on right now is these vehicles, these driverless vehicles, the ones that can just kind of drive themselves. And I heard the other day folks talking about the problem with that is that, well, you know, you'll take the human out of the car. And the makers of the vehicle said the vast majority of accidents are human error. They have nothing to do with even if somebody's coming into your lane and the decision you make. There are more often than not things that could have been done differently.
No question. And you know, I think what you'll find is the vast majority of accidents are through drivers that are distracted, through driver error, through lack of experience. But you know, for me personally, I think the future of the automobile industry is a fascinating thing to think about. But if you think about how long it's going to ultimately take to roll out vehicles that are operated by humans like me and you, into the new wave, it's going to take a very long time. In my lifetime, I think it will happen, but it's going to be late in my life. So,
even though you just had a birthday, you got many years left.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
A question we've got here: if I'm injured and I want to determine if I have a legal claim, what should I consider doing? So, kind of, what are the next steps?
Yeah. So, and we talk a lot on the show about you don't have to hire our law firm to handle your case. That's not why we do this. We do it to educate the public. So you don't have to come hire us if you're involved in these types of cases. There are a lot of incredible law firms out there, great lawyers in our city, in our state. But you need to get to somebody quickly, David. And the reason is not because we're trying to drive people to lawyers. It is because if you don't, there is a whole wealth of data, a whole wealth of evidence out there that is necessary to present a claim. And if you don't get somebody involved early, you lose that information. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had people, David, come into my office and have asked me to represent them, and the vehicle has already been lost and discarded because the insurance company paid the money and had it salvaged. The officer no longer works in that force and has moved to another state, or witnesses just don't remember the accident because it was too long ago, or an officer has had another 500 accidents that they've worked over the last year and a half, and they come and say, well, I never really got better, and I thought I was going to get better, but now I need a new surgery. I wasn't aware that I was going to have a suit. Can you help me? And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But you want to get to a lawyer quickly, and that's especially true in circumstances where you're dealing with work-related injuries and where you're dealing with trucking companies. Because a lot of times, the trucking companies aren't all doing it the wrong way, a lot are doing it the right way, but they have very advanced skills when it comes to post-accident investigation. They will meet with the officers, they will secure vehicles, they will take the pictures, have accident reconstructionists on the ground, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't have somebody on your team, you're behind the 8 ball to start.
Yeah. A question we have here from a viewer: I was recently in an accident where I was injured on someone else's property. I have learned that other people were injured before me due to the same condition. Will this help my case, and if so, how?
Absolutely, and it certainly can. And it kind of depends on what type of case we'd be talking about. Let's take a couple examples. If you are at the museum and you are injured because you fell off a stair, and it turns out that that stair ultimately was not built within code and it was 3 inches too high, which can create a trip hazard. There's a reason why we have stairs that have certain, there's certain code sections that require those stairs to be at a certain level. If they're not, people are expecting a stair of a certain level, they don't get it, they can fall, etc. If there's advanced knowledge by the museum that that stair was in that condition because other people had fallen there before, there's what's called notice and knowledge, which goes to some of the essential elements necessary to prove your damages in a case. So that notice and knowledge of pre-existing injuries, pre-existing accidents certainly can be important in the case. And now let's take it in the realm of a car accident. Okay. We look at pre-existing driving records of the drivers that cause these accidents to figure out what is this person's propensity to operate a vehicle within the rules and within the guidelines that are set in society, and ultimately, are they good or are they bad drivers? And sometimes the answer is, they've had some pre-existing issues with reference to driving, and the person that loaned them the car may now have responsibility because they gave it in the hands of an incompetent to operate. Dave, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about statute of limitations in these cases and why it's important to get a lawyer as quick as you can to make sure you're preserving your statute of limitations.
We'll step aside right there as we head to break. A reminder of how you can join our conversation. We'd love to get your feedback. You see the ways there on the screen to do that. Also, Facebook as well as Twitter. The firm of Hollis, Wright, also on social media. Would love to have you to be a part of that as well. It's a great way really to continue the conversation long after the lights of these cameras go off. You can find the firm if you'll just search that Hollis Wright. You'll find them on Facebook, and on Twitter it is Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. More of The Attorney is coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm. Thank you for watching The Attorneys. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury-related topics, you can call, email, or text us. Or you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or simply contact us by going to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us watching The Attorneys.
Got to learn to put that phone down when we're behind the wheel. Welcome back into The Attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'd love to have you join the conversation. You see ways that you can join our conversation and check in with us there on your screen. Continuing our conversation with Josh Wright of the firm of Hollis Wright. When we went to break talking about statute of limitations, you know, we have done hundreds of shows together on so many different topics, but it seems like the importance of the statute of limitations is almost touched on and really stressed in every single show we do.
Well, it is, because ultimately the statute of limitations is a time bar that prevents you from bringing suit in the future. And statutes a lot of times can be more complicated than simply saying, David, you've got 2 years to file that lawsuit.
Right.
Well, a lot of times the question is, well, 2 years from what date? Especially when you're dealing with medical devices, drug ingestion, product liability suits, malpractice claims. There are discovery rules involved in fraud cases where you have 2 years from the date you knew or should have known of the wrongful conduct. And so getting to counsel to at least establish when your statute of limitations will run is important, so at least you then know when the benchmark dates are, when those dates are that are important in your case, within which you've got a time frame to get things moving in it.
So it's different depending on the type of case. If it's a car accident versus a workplace accident versus a different kind of, they can be different statutes.
Absolutely, versus intentional conduct. If somebody intentionally gets in a fight, an 18-year-old kid in high school decides on a Friday night after a football game he's going to get a fight with someone, and then he badly injures someone, causes some permanent injury. That individual may very well be covered under the homeowner's coverage of his family. That lawsuit statute of limitation may be completely different than that of a car accident, which could be 2 years. So a lot of it will depend on the type of claim, the type of injury involved, and or the type of conduct involved.
If it's a civil injury case in the state of Alabama, what is the burden of proof there?
Yeah, so it's different. You hear on television, you see, it's kind of interesting because I get these questions a lot about television lawyers, and there's always in these cases this aha moment where this lawyer just whooped up on somebody and actually had some piece of evidence that nobody ever knew was out there, and oh my goodness, this person on the stand has no way to answer it, right? Well, in the real world, it doesn't really work that way. Lawyers are extremely thorough, almost to a fault sometimes, and they evaluate the answer to every question before you ever get to trial. So there aren't a lot of these aha moments. But one of the confusing components of the TV lawyers and those lawyers that are on Law and Order and other things is they talk a lot about the burden of proof in criminal cases. And people think a lot of times that the criminal burden of proof is the same in a civil case.
Because that's reasonable doubt, right?
That's right. It's a totally different standard. So you've got reasonable doubt, which is a much higher standard, because the goal is to make the standard so high that we may let some guilty people go free, but we ensure that we don't ever convict an innocent person.
Okay.
So the standard's very high. In a civil context, the standard is unique. It's different. It's lower. And it is it more likely than not, within the preponderance of evidence, that the facts and evidence support the claim of the plaintiff or the defendant. And in short, what that means is when you see the scales of justice and you fill evidence up in each and they teeter back and forth, as long as you are able to present just a little more evidence in favor of the plaintiff in a civil case, and it tips the scales of justice ever so slightly in favor of the plaintiff, we call it 51%, the plaintiff shall recover in that case. So it's a lower burden, and there are a whole host of reasons why the burden is lower in a civil context than that of a criminal context. So it's just a different process. So when you see television burdens and lawyers explaining on television those burdens, a lot of times you're dealing with a criminal burden. So as lawyers, when we try cases, one of the most important things that we do is we explain to the jury before we ever start opening argument. It's in what's called the voir dire process. We explain to them what the burden is and ensure and maintain that they can understand and accept that burden because it is unique and different than what they may see on television.
We need to head to break in about a minute or so, but want to at least start this, and maybe we'll need to continue the conversation on the other side here. But a viewer question. I was recently injured on a major job site involving multiple companies. I don't think the accident was my fault, but I don't know who was responsible for the dangerous condition. What should I do?
Yeah, that screams of get counsel involved quickly, and the reason is this. When you're dealing with a workplace accident, you've got a couple different areas of personal injury law in play. Number one, you've got workers' compensation, which is a no-fault system, which has a limited structured way to recover. There may be what's called third-party claims. Those are entities that are not the employer that may have responsibility and have contributed in some small way to the ultimate injury, where there's not a structured damage recovery, but it opens up the broad array of potential damages available to that individual. And then there may be, medical components that are applicable, different types of insurances that could be applicable. So you want to make sure in an industrial accident context that you're having your case evaluated from a workers' comp perspective, if that's applicable, and then also from a third-party perspective to make sure that all the entities and individuals that are responsible for that injury are considered and evaluated by counsel.
When we come back, can we talk for a moment about in a workers' comp case, oftentimes they will have a doctor they would like you to go see and kind of knowing your rights are, and maybe if we can kind of level the playing field a little bit so that just to kind of arm folks with information of how to make sure that their rights are being protected.
And I'll do you one more than that. And that is, we'll talk about your medical insurance provider like Blue Cross Blue Shield wanting to be paid back on the back end of a personal injury case. Same kind of concept.
Okay.
We'll talk about it.
All right, we'll dive into that. Let's step aside as we do so. A reminder of how you can join our conversation. Call, text, email, that information on the screen all throughout the program. Also, would love to have you like the firm on Facebook. Really easy to do. Some great information there, a great resource for you. And also, it's really a great way for you to continue to converse with the firm of Hollis Wright. You'll find them there on Facebook as well as Twitter. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright. If you've ever served on a jury, you may have wondered why there are gaps in the evidence you're given at trial. In today's Legal 4-in-1, we're answering the question, is there insurance to pay the verdict? Know this, just because the lawyers never mention insurance in a trial, it doesn't mean there is not insurance to pay the verdict. Rule 4-in-1 of the Alabama Rules of Evidence states this: evidence that a person was or was not insured against liability is generally not admissible or allowed to be discussed at trial in front of the jury. The reason for the rule is simple. A jury could award more money in a case if they knew the defendant had insurance to pay for it. But the reality in our state is this: in almost all lawsuits that get to a trial, insurance is there to pay judgments awarded by the jury. For example, all automobiles in Alabama are required to have liability insurance. Coverage can range from $25,000 up to $1 million in these cases. In theory, all car crash cases that get to trial should have insurance available to pay any verdict awarded in the case. Trucks have to carry anywhere from $750,000 to $5 million worth of insurance. Unfortunately, You'll never hear that during the trial. Even in medical malpractice cases, the doctor has liability insurance to help pay a judgment. That's something you won't hear during trial because the rules just don't allow that testimony. Yet almost all judgments against a doctor involve liability insurance. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our promise and pledge to you.
Welcome back in to the attorneys here with Josh Wright of the firm Hollis Wright. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before we get back into, we were talking there about workplace accidents. Interesting thing though about the show that I want to be sure we touch on is that right now, as we speak, attorneys are standing by. So you not only call, text, email, you could do that to join the conversation, but you can actually speak with an attorney standing by right now.
That's exactly correct. You know, if you call, if you text, if you email, you're going to talk with a live lawyer tonight about a legal issue that you've got. And if we can help you, we're going to do that. We're going to answer your questions. And if we don't know the answer to something, we're not arrogant enough to think that we're just going to make it up. We're going to send you to somebody that understands a certain area of law. Because there are a lot of things as lawyers that we're good at, but there are a lot of things we don't know the answer to, but we can get you to the right person. So if you've got a legal issue and you call, email, or text, know that you're going to be communicating directly with a lawyer. And the same thing with Facebook and Twitter. We respond to those the same way with a live lawyer.
Yeah, have nothing to lose, so take advantage of that.
And I'll give you a little snippet of information that sometimes we have not talked about on this show. If you looked at the firm fact coming in from commercial, it indicated that everybody operating their vehicle in Alabama has at least a minimum of $25,000 worth of coverage. Say two things to that. Number one, there's some people doing it the wrong way that don't have that coverage. But number two, if your case gets to trial or a case gets to trial and you're a juror, you can pretty much guarantee there's insurance involved.
Really?
Lawyers are generally not going to try the cases where there's not some identifiable way to recover for the client financially. And so most often you're going to have insurance every time you try a case. So there's a piece of information. If you're a juror, you recognize that. Yeah. That's right.
When we went to break, we were talking about workplace injuries. There's something interesting that I've heard you all talk about before, and that is that it appears as though from just a consumer that if there's a workplace injury, there's a physician that oftentimes folks businesses, do they partner with a certain physician or a medical institution, and somebody that is kind of on their payroll, if you will?
Yeah, it's kind of like, there are certain orthopedics and certain practices out there that will take Medicare and Medicaid patients, and some that will not. Right. There are some that are direct payment companies. They want direct payment and will not take certain forms of insurance. The same thing is true with workers' comp. There are certain companies out there that do work for workers' compensation groups and insurance companies. That doesn't make them bad doctors. In fact, there are some incredible doctors that work within the realm of workers' compensation. But the good news is this. If you have a doctor that you don't think is providing the type of care that you need in a workers' comp context, you have the ability through your lawyer and through the workers' comp code to request another doctor under certain circumstances. So another reason why you'd want counsel involved, especially in an industrial accident case, to make sure that you've got somebody lead, guiding, and directing you along the way to make sure that you're being represented not only by counsel, but you've got appropriate doctors to help you.
What else, when it comes to workplace injuries, is a matter of concern for you with the experience you have in seeing cases like this?
Well, a lot of times, and it's not just workplace, I think it's generally with injury cases, people do not realize that they have an obligation pursuant to a contract with their health insurer to pay back certain monies if they're successful in a case. Because it doesn't sound intuitive that I'm injured at no fault of my own. I'm hit by, let's say, a third person in a car accident. And my insurance covers me,
right,
yet I've got to pay my insurance company back if I recover against the person that caused the accident. Just doesn't g-haul well. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't sit well with people. But the reality is if you put yourself in the shoes of that insurance company, it's called subrogation. We deal with it every day. That insurance company is saying, look, I am not the cause of this accident either. It was caused by a third party, but I had to pay on your behalf. So if he pays you or she pays you for causing that accident, I want to make sure as the insurance company that I'm compensated too. Good lawyers, what they do is they educate clients on the front end so there's no misconception on the back end as to what could happen. And good lawyers negotiate with the insurance companies to reduce the amount that you owe down to a more reasonable level so that you are able to be compensated more with the money that's being paid by the person that caused the injury. So it's a misconception, and it's a little complicated how the process works, but another reason why you want to get counsel involved.
I want to get to what continues to be a hot button topic, and this is the uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. Help us understand that, and how exactly does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you hit me, your insurance is primary. Your liability insurance is primary if you caused the accident. Let's assume, though, that you weren't insured.
All right.
If you weren't, there's something that I pay for in my insurance, not liability coverage, not property damage coverage, not comprehensive coverage, but it's called uninsured motorist coverage or underinsured motorist coverage. And what that does is if you hit me and you didn't have coverage and you're uninsured, I have my own coverage to protect me. So I'm working with my own insurance company to compensate me for the injury that you caused because you didn't have insurance. Now let's assume hypothetically that you hit me, right, Dave?
Okay.
And you hit me and you caused a lot more damage than the $25,000 of coverage you may have because maybe you have the state minimum. And I've got uninsured motorist coverage on top of what you've got. So it's called underinsured motorists, and I'm able to tap into that. One of the interesting things about that consumers and injury victims often don't understand is if I didn't cause the accident, it probably is going to have very minimal, if any, impact on my insurance premiums for me to tap into my uninsured motorist coverage because candidly, I pay for that on a monthly basis. And one piece of advice I'd give anybody is buy uninsured motorist coverage because it will protect you and a family member when you need it the most, and it's not expensive coverage at all.
We have a minute remaining. Want to give you the opportunity, just final thoughts from you and what to leave folks with tonight.
Yeah, you know, this area of personal injury law is an interesting area, and it's a real broad injury. We could do 3, 4, 5 shows on this because it ranges from workers' compensation cases to product liability cases and everything in between. You know, getting counsel involved early, whether it's us or whether it's someone else, is critically important to help lead, guide, and direct you through the process. And so what I'd say is this. Get counsel involved if you have been involved in an accident. At least call to gather information as quickly as you can to make sure you're protected in the future.
Great stuff tonight. Appreciate the time. Josh Wright of the firm Hollis Wright. As we wrap things up, attorneys standing by for the next few moments. Take advantage of that. Also, here's how you can continue the conversation. Also, check us out on Facebook as well as Twitter. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time right here on The Attorney.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.